Let's go back in time, not just to an event, but right into the mind of a man living through it moment by terrifying moment. The year is 1666, the city, London, and for 5 days in September, it's about to become a full-blown inferno. Our guide through these flames is one of the greatest diarists in history, Samuel Pepys. So this isn't your typical history lesson. We are about to experience the Great Fire through his eyes, his fears, and his frantic, desperate actions, all recorded as it was happening.
And this is how it all begins. Not with a bang, but with a sleepy, casual, almost unbelievable dismissal. Just try to picture it. You're woken up at 3 in the morning by your maid. You look out, you see a glow off in the distance. But hey, you live in a city built of wood and pitch. Fires happen. So you think, that's far enough away, and you just roll over. There's such a chilling irony in these words, isn't there? Pepsy's absolutely no idea that this small, distant fire is about to devour his entire world. He goes back to sleep, totally unaware he's just witnessed the birth of a monster.
Well, that casual attitude does not last long. When Pepys gets up again around 7, the world has changed. His maid Jane comes back, and the news is staggering. Above 300 houses have been burned down, and it is now burning down all Fish Street by London Bridge. 300 houses. Just let that sink in. This is no ordinary fire. The sheer scale of it is horrifying. And that sleepy indifference from a few hours ago? It's gone. It's been replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. This is the moment the city's nightmare truly begins.
You see, the conditions that morning were a perfect storm for an absolute catastrophe. The spark came from a baker's house on Pudding Lane, a street crammed with warehouses full of flammable stuff like oil and brandy. London had also just been through a long, hot summer, so all those timber-framed houses are just tinder dry, waiting for a flame. And then you have the final, devastating ingredient, a powerful easterly wind. Pepys actually climbs the Tower of London to see it for himself, and he describes this wind as mighty high and driving it into the city. This isn't just a fire anymore, it's a wind-driven firestorm. And in the middle of all this massive destruction, Pepys notices this one tiny, absolutely heartbreaking detail. It's not about buildings, it's not about money, it's about the instinct of a living thing to cling to its home, even when that home becomes a death trap. He sees these pigeons, totally confused, refusing to leave, just circling and circling until their wings catch fire and they fall. It's a devastatingly poignant image that just perfectly captures the sheer helplessness of everyone and everything in the fire's path.
So what were the authorities doing? Well, with the city in peril, Pepys goes straight to the king, who gives a very clear order. Pull down houses, create fire breaks, spare nothing. Pepys then races to find the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, and what he finds is a total breakdown of leadership. To be fair, there was no citywide fire department back then, but the response fell to this one completely overwhelmed man. He's found wandering the streets, just exhausted and defeated, crying that no one will listen to him. And his response to the crisis? I must go and refresh myself. At the most critical moment, the man in charge just gives up.
With the city's leadership in total disarray, it's no surprise that chaos just took over. It's every person for themselves. Pepys walks through the city and what he describes as pure pandemonium. The streets are gridlocked with people, with horses, with carts, all just desperately trying to move their goods to safety. He talks about people moving their belongings from one house to another, only for the fire to catch up with them again. Even churches, which should be places of sanctuary, are crammed to the rafters with merchandise. The entire social order is just collapsing under the weight of sheer panic. And this explains why the fire became so unstoppable. You see, it wasn't just spreading street by street, no. The heat was so intense it created this powerful updraft, a convection current that lifted burning embers high into the air. And the wind carried these fire drops all across the city, starting new fires far, far ahead of the main blaze. Just imagine standing on a boat in the middle of the Thames River, thinking you're safe, only to be pelted from above by a literal shower of fire. It must have felt like the sky itself was burning down.
Let's just trace how fast this all escalated. It starts at 3 a.m. with a sleepy glance out of a window. By midday, he's witnessed the complete collapse of the city's leadership. By evening, as he stands on the bankside, he sees a sight so awful it makes him weep. The fire has become one entire arch of fire, stretching over a mile long. And by night, this abstract threat has become intensely personal. The fire is coming for him, and now he's out in his own garden, by moonlight, desperately packing up his life.
So now the fire shifts from this huge citywide catastrophe into a deeply personal crisis for Pepys.
It's no longer something to just be observed from a distance, it's something to be survived. Pepys, a man of considerable wealth and status, is now just another refugee, fighting to save whatever he holds dear from those approaching flames.
Can you even picture this? Samuel Pepys, clerk of the Acts to the Navy Board, a respected, powerful government official, is out in a cart at 4 in the morning wearing nothing but his nightgown, personally escorting his money and valuables out of the city. This single image just strips away every pretense of rank and order. He's just a man, terrified and desperate, doing whatever it takes to save his life's work. It's an unbelievably surreal moment.
So let's look at the inventory of what he actually chose to save. First, the treasure, the gold, the silver plate. Makes sense. Then the rest of his household goods, and then comes maybe the most famous detail from his entire diary. He digs a pit in his garden, not just for his wine, but for his Parmesan cheese. Now, it sounds almost comical to us, but you have to remember, in the 17th century, a wheel of Parmesan was a massive luxury item, a very expensive import. In this moment of pure panic, his mind is clear enough to bury his cheese. It's such a humanizing, unforgettable detail.
As the fire gets closer and closer to his own neighborhood and the incredibly important Navy office, Pepys becomes a man of action. He realizes pulling houses down is just too slow. So he and his colleagues decide on a much more drastic measure: gunpowder. They get permission from the Duke of York and literally start blowing up houses to create a massive firebreak. He writes that the explosions did frighten people more than anything, but you know what? Crucially, it worked. It finally stopped the fire in its tracks.
But while Pepys is fighting to save his little corner of London, the main body of the fire rages on, reaching the very heart of the city. And on the 4th day, it begins to consume the irreplaceable symbols of London's history, its wealth, and its faith. This is the absolute climax of the destruction.
We have to understand this was not just any church. The old St. Paul's was the soul of London, a colossal Gothic cathedral, one of the largest in all of Europe. People actually thought it was fireproof. They filled its crypt with books and goods for safekeeping. But the heat was so intense that its lead roof melted and flowed down the streets like rivers of silver. The massive stones of its walls actually exploded from the heat like cannonballs. Its destruction wasn't just the loss of a building, it was the symbolic death of medieval London itself. This is just an incredible piece of eyewitness testimony. Pepys finds this piece of glass from a chapel window, lying in the street, and it's been melted into a shape like parchment. Just think for a second about the temperatures required to do that. We're talking about a heat so extreme that it is deforming stone and glass, turning the entire city into a giant kiln. This one small, tangible object makes that unimaginable heat feel terrifyingly real.
Now here's something strange, a real paradox. The property damage was apocalyptic. We're talking over 13,000 houses and 87 churches completely destroyed. But the official death toll, it was in the single digits? How is that even possible? While historians still debate this, it's very likely that the intense heat simply cremated many victims, leaving no trace behind. It's also possible that the deaths of the poor and the unknown just went unrecorded in all the chaos. The true human cost is something we'll probably never know.
And then, amidst the ruins of the Royal Exchange, he notes this tiny miracle of survival: a cat pulled from a chimney, its hair completely burned off, but somehow still alive. Just like the pigeons he saw earlier, it's a small, poignant detail that just cuts right through the epic scale of the disaster. A single, fragile life that somehow managed to endure when everything around it was completely obliterated.
By the 5th day, the wind has died down. The fire has mostly burned itself out. The frantic fight for survival is finally over. And now, in the eerie quiet of an ash-covered dawn, comes the somber task of surveying what has been lost. The adrenaline is gone, and it's been replaced by shock and grief.
Just imagine standing there with him. Barking Church, right by his house, was one of the few buildings saved at the very edge of the fire. He climbs its steeple, and he looks west, over his city. But the city is gone. As far as his eyes can see, there is nothing but smoldering ruins, a blackened desert where thousands of homes and lives once stood. He calls it the saddest sight of desolation that I ever saw, and you can really feel the immense weight of that statement.
The scope of that desolation was almost total. It wasn't just homes that were gone. It was the entire civic and commercial infrastructure of one of the world's great cities. St. Paul's, the center of faith. The Royal Exchange,
the center of commerce; the Guildhall, the center of government; 87 parish churches, the halls of the great guilds. In just 5 days, 1,000 years of London's history had been completely wiped from the map.
And yet, life, in its own chaotic way, just goes on. Pepys documents these surreal scenes from the immediate aftermath. Moorfields, a park outside the city walls, has become a vast refugee camp. In the streets, people are breaking open barrels of sugar just to have something to drink with their beer. The Great Westminster Hall is no longer a court of law, but a massive storage unit. Society is trying to function, but its container has been shattered into a million pieces.
And let's not forget the personal stakes in all this. £2,350. This was Pepys's life savings, a very significant fortune at the time. He personally rescued it, first in a cart in his nightgown, and then later by boat. This isn't just a number. It represents years of his work, his security, his future. And he saved it. In the middle of a national disaster, this was his own personal victory.
But that victory came at a cost. The fire may have been extinguished, but it continued to burn in the minds of those who lived through it. Pepys admits to being terrified in his sleep, plagued by nightmares of fire and collapsing buildings. This wasn't just an event they cleaned up and moved on from. It was a deep, collective trauma that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. And that's really what it all comes down to, isn't it? Pepys' diary forces us to ask this very question. He saved his money, his important government papers, his wine, and his Parmesan cheese. These were the things he valued most. Looking back through his eyes at all that smoke and ruin, we're left to wonder, in that same moment of ultimate crisis, what would we run to save? What would be our cheese?